Tonight is Tuesday, May 30th, 2017. I'd like to call a meeting of the Fitchburg City Council as a whole committee meeting to order with regards to the fiscal year 2018 budget review. This evening, we have the mayor and the finance team consisting of the city treasurer, city auditor, city assessor, who will formally present the FY18 budget to the city council. Councilors will then have an opportunity after the presentation has been made to ask questions or give comments. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll have an opportunity to read and review the proposed city council budget cuts that have already been submitted and receive any additional cuts that councilors would propose moving forward. That said, Mayor DiNatale, finance team, I will kick it over to you. The floor is yours. Councilors, just you'll have an opportunity afterwards. I'd prefer that the mayor have an opportunity to get through the entire presentation before we then field questions. That's it, Mayor. Thank
you, Mr. President and council members. Allow me to thank and compliment following people for their expertise and their advice in assembling this FY18 proposed budget. That would be City Auditor to my right, Calvin Brooks, Deputy Auditor who's here in the audience, Jacqueline Cronin, Chief Assessor Ken Wilson to my left, City Treasurer Ann Cervantes to my right, and all the department heads that had input into this document. Councilors, I'm pleased to submit to you my fiscal 2018 budget. The budget as submitted breaks down as follows: General Fund $118,343.80. Airport, $683,411, wastewater, $11,611,423, and water, $6,248,821. Councilors, you will recognize an approximate $5 million increase from FY17 to FY18 in the general fund. This increase will be mainly funded through Prop 2.5 new growth and state aid. The lion's share of the increase is recognized in $1.9 million for the public school system, $2.5 million in employee benefits and contracts, $1.9 million, in health care and pension, and $600,000 in contracts. $400,000 toward an unfunded EPA mandate, also known as the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System Permit. The new MS4 permit regulations are much more stringent, and a new stormwater program must be designed and implemented to maintain compliance. The city currently spends approximately $630,000 per year to operate stormwater system in compliance with the current MS4 permit regulations. The new MS4 permit begins on 7/1/2017. Regulations are estimated to cost the city approximately $1 million more in FY18. Our DPW Commissioner and Stormwater Committee has been able to reduce the fiscal burden on the city's general fund by allocating costs, changing priorities, and taking predicted measures so that the increase to the city would be $400,000 as opposed to the $1 million. I would like to take a moment and recognize our DPW crews for their efforts in protecting the city and reduce the financial burden as much as possible on these federally unfunded mandates, such as the sewer separation project and MS4. Purpose of MS4 is to prevent erosion, flooding, property and roadway damage. Fitchburg has 80 miles of piping, 1,600 drain manholes, 7,000 catch basins, and 450 outfalls to water bodies. This permit will last for 10 years. The city has increased our snow and ice account by $50,000, totaling $500,000. Since FY16, I have added $100,000 to this account. This year's snow budget, the city spent roughly $1.3 million. FY16, the city spent roughly $650,000. This budget has increased hours for the Fitchburg Senior Center that will now be open for 5 days following this deliberation, of course. The city will meet its net school spending obligation, funding the Fitchburg public school system at $54.2 million. Furthermore, our estimates show that we will be exceeding our net school spending requirement. I would also like to add that in FY17, The city has already appropriated nearly $300,000 towards capital improvements. Right here in this building, the memorial seating will be replaced in the auditorium, and we're going to be addressing the retaining wall that's been damaged for a number of years at South Street Elementary. And this is all coming out of available funds. And I intend to put capital improvement projects in our school department on a priority list for FY18. This spending plan maintains the current workforce as well as allots one new critical building inspector position. My intention of this building inspector is to fund itself through permit fees and fines in the commercial sector of the city. With limited inspectors, the city as it stands does not have the manpower to provide the necessary code enforcement and plan review necessary from our commercial buildings. And this is sorely needed, and that position will pay for itself and even go beyond that, is our intention. Lastly, this budget has taken steps to reduce the city's reliance on community development block grant funding for personal service expenditures by transitioning some of those expenses into the city budget. This transition totals an estimated amount of $60,000, leaving $680,094 in remaining grant funding. Reliance on grant programs for personal services would potentially be detrimental to the city should grant monies be cut from federal funding. And you may or may not know that the current administration has proposed to cut CDBG funding. It's a long way from being resolved. For this reason, it is my full intention with every new budget to lessen the reliance of personal services and grants and place that obligation into the city's operating budget. Consider this, councilors. The city finance team, as well as myself, have researched ways to lessen the city's dependence on the overlay surplus revenue in our general operating budget. However, with this year's MS4 permits, removal of personal services from CDBG, added funds to snow and ice, the city could not absorb additional costs for this fiscal year. However, the city will continue to look at measures and ways that the city can lessen this dependence in future budgets. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the council. That is my fiscal 2018 budget.
Questions, comments from councilors? Councilor Green.
The building inspector, that's in addition to the two that are already accounted for in the budget?
Yes.
So essentially, we'll have 3 building inspectors and an assistant inspector?
No, the three building inspectors.
Right, what is an assistant inspector for $6,500? Is that a person, or is that somebody doing part-time clerical work, or what, for $6,500?
Yeah, that's,
If I can answer that,
Yeah.
that would be, an assistant is someone who fills in for an inspector when they're absent. It leans more toward the plumbing inspector and the electrical inspector. When they're on vacation, we sometimes need to pull somebody in from another community to do some inspectional work, and they're paid out of that account.
Okay, just to cover when
To
the
cover-
3 inspectors that we have, if one of those is out, or,
It could be any of the inspectors. Normally, the building inspectors cover for each other. But the plumbing inspector and the electrical inspector being a little more specialized, we have to pull somebody else in. Usually it's an inspector from another community that's willing to come in here for a day or part of a day to do some inspections.
all right, and the hopes that by bringing that 3rd person on, that they'll be able to handle our commercial end of the building inspections that need to be done, or with the expected growth, which is all good things. That's what I'm hoping for.
Councilor, what we discovered in deliberations with the building commissioner was that we're working in a mode where we have to be notified by the commercial property owner that their inspection certificate or sticker is expired. We want to be proactive. We want to have a system in place where we are going to know beforehand that it's now May and Harry Smith's shoe repair business needs to be re-inspected. That person goes out, does that inspection. With those fees, and increased fees, that's going to pay for that position. As a matter of fact, what we anticipate is exceeding the cost of the person themselves in terms of bringing in those much-needed fees. That was pointed out by the building commissioner that was, a problem in the department and a deficiency. So that's why we believe it's the right thing to do.
Well, thank you for addressing that. Thank you.
And councilors, just before I continue down the speakers list, I know many of you will have a laundry list of questions or comments that span beyond just one particular item. If you could, move through your entire list at one time. My preference would be to go through, the entire council once before then going back to a councilor to be able to speak a second time. That said, Councilor Joseph.
My questions are all around revenue. Where is the cultivation agreement revenue put into this budget?
Go ahead, Calvin.
It's not,
It's not resolved, it's not a done deal.
right.
Yeah.
You would know more than I.
Yeah, well, the solicitors crafted
Yeah,
the...
at this point, I believe that there's not a firm enough
Right.
situation where we can reasonably figure out how much revenue we're going to get.
Okay, if this
So
was,
it's not in this budget at this point.
if this was to come into the budget, which line on the budget would that come into?
I'm assuming it would come in as a local receipt of some kind.
Excuse me, just for clarification, there is, to the extent that any of these buildings are built out
Yeah.
for the production, we've recognized that, and that would be in the growth line item, under new growth.
Right, that's why I was confused why new growth went backwards this year. It seemed like we have places moving in.
Yeah, there is a lot of projects started, but, as far as cultivation goes, there's only that one that really is built up already.
Okay,
And so, we pushed them as far as we could. July 1st is the assessment date. So anything after July 1st goes on next year as well.
okay, and what is the $200,000 increase in charges for services trash?
That's basically looking at our past experience with trash fees, and we're gaining that much revenue.
Confident?
Yep. Well, yeah. I think we've benefited because other landfills have closed, so we're getting more business that way. I think that the agreement was changed where we can receive more trash.
Okay. And licenses and permits?
That's looking at past experience and feeling that we're getting that kind of revenue.
Well, it seems, this shows a growth, or this kind of looks flat every year, and then we have an increase of $150,000.
Right. These figures are on page 5. These are the figures we use on the recap. I should look before I speak, but where is it at the end?
Council, to go back a step to your comment about the landfill, where without going into any detail, because we're not at that point yet, we're in discussions with Waste Management and the town of Westminster to look at the property around the landfill. We are becoming unique in the state in that most landfills, because they've reached capacity, are closing.
Yeah.
And we have the opportunity, again, without going into any real detail, because we haven't reached any agreement. We're far from that, but we have the capacity to extend the landfill. And again, we've been in discussions with Waste Management along with the town of Westminster, but it's only been discussion. It hasn't gone any further than that. The town of Westminster has a great deal to do with it, and we haven't gotten to that point. But there's a potential there.
I know that it's a cash cow, and I know that it brings in revenue, and I know that but I know that it has limited capacity. And Waste Management is trucking in tons and tons of trash from other places, and we're getting money for it, yeah, but are we taking care of ourselves in the long run if we have to shut down the landfill after it's filled to capacity? Are we taking in money and then eventually the cow dies and we're in trouble? So I guess, looking at that, I would say, at what point do we want to reduce the amount that we allow them to come in and keep the revenue level and stop and prolong the life of our landfill for our own use in the future, as opposed to just because they're making a lot more than we are. They're making a lot more than $2 million off of that charge.
Certainly that's part of the negotiation, but I think we're looking at a capacity landfill is another 5 years out.
Okay.
So that, some might argue that's not an exceptional amount of time, but I think that the discussion's going to continue, and hopefully we'll get to a point where we all benefit from it.
Okay.
Right.
And back to the licenses.
Yeah.
Licenses. Okay, page 5 has the recap
Yeah.
figures, which is like a budget figure. If you go to page 52 in the budget. 52. These are the actual figures. So if you look at the permit line, you'll see that the 800 is reasonable.
And if I'm not mistaken, when we talked to the building commissioner earlier on,
Permits.
some
Licenses and permits.
ordinances went in to increase some of the fees for permits,
Correct.
particularly the solar fees where he was undercharging on those.
Right.
And so we feel it's reasonable, given the actuals and given the increases that are coming in the fees.
And given the fact that we're talking about hiring a building inspector who's going to go after commercial inspections, which will require permit fees for those inspections.
Sometimes I get more concerned with revenues than I do with spending, because one leads the other, and if we're overstating our revenues, that gets us in more trouble than overspending, because we spend to a budget that we don't have. So I guess revenue to me is more of a concern, looking at the revenue figures, if they are optimistic as opposed to realistic. Do you find them to be less than realistic? Do you think that you will reach these and exceed them?
Let me answer this question. I think, honestly, when we were going through the budget, we were conservative on our revenues. I was pushing for a few categories up a little more
Yeah.
than what we did. And I think our feeling is to be conservative, we need to be realistic but under. So
Okay.
I'd be extremely surprised if we didn't hit all of these and possibly outdo them.
Good, that's all I want to hear. Thank you.
Counselor Tran.
First of all, my comment is that I think it's great that Chapter 70 funding has increased by 2.4 million for this year over FY17, 4.1 million over FY16, which is good. In the police budget, page 19, there's a new line item for taser stipend for the amount of $108,000. Is that for the purchase of lasers, or is it for something else? Or carrying lasers, or what is that new line item?
Yeah, that would be for purchasing them, along with training, isn't it?
The chief is right there if
thought that was
he
the-
knows if that line
It's a
item.
stipend. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. That's was negotiated through contractual negotiations, that's what we have to pay for them to agree to carry the tasers. Right. Such as the unions. Yeah.
So I'm assuming that new line item will be carried on for the foreseeable years, and it's going to cost the budget. Probably the amount will go up on a annual basis.
In
Thank
all
you.
likelihood, yeah.
I notice a lot of our buildings have their own custodians. And I think all of the custodian positions are full-time. Have we looked at outsourcing or bringing in custodial services without having to have full-time positions at each of these buildings?
I'm not sure what you're referring to, Counselor. City Hall has a contracted custodial company.
Okay.
It's not a city employee.
And other buildings, for example?
Well,
The police,
the schools,
police,
police is
school,
contracted out as well.
library.
Yeah.
Are those all contract positions?
Library is a position that they hold. It's an employee.
And-
Senior
and
center as
Council on
well.
Aging
Yeah.
has its own position too. And those are full-time positions.
Yes.
Any chance we look at contracting those out in the future?
Yeah, we certainly could. But again, that's an impact bargaining situation.
Okay, so
So
those
it's
positions
complicated.
are unionized?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, indeed.
In the last couple of years, we've talked about getting rid of personal use of cell phones in the budget. And I think the last budget, FY17, the IT manager, Trevor Bonilla, came in front of us and told us I think they've done away with personal use of cell phones being paid through the budget. Have we completely done away with that?
I know in this budget, in this union hearing with the police, was that removed?
It was rolled
No.
in, Mr. Mayor, it was rolled into the professional
Right, yeah,
standards stipend.
yeah. I'm not sure to what detail, Counselor, fire department, police department, I'm not sure. That might be something, a question for the department head, for the chiefs themselves. But I know police, we have eliminated that. But again, it's as part of the negotiation process, it was rolled into basically their salaries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of contracts and negotiations, there's a line item in each of the budgets that stick out like a sore thumb. And we constantly, I know as a counselor, and I'm sure many of the counselors here have heard it from the residents and constituents, and that line item is the clothing allowance. I think Mayor, we have to do a better job at negotiation time. And let's get rid of this line item. And because when you look at some of the departments, you see people making $60, $70, $80, $90, $100,000 and still getting clothing allowance, which doesn't make sense at all. And being a taxpayer sitting at home and they look at the budget that we have online, I get that question all the time. So I don't know how we're going to deal with this in the future when we negotiate the contracts. I know it's going to be a difficult thing, but we have to somehow do away with that line item. That's just
Yeah.
something that I'm conveying to you that
Yeah.
we hear. I know other councils here as well.
Yeah, I when I was sitting where you are, Counselor, I had the same issues with that. But you got to understand that whole negotiation waltz that we go through when we have this, and it's a dance. This happened years ago when perhaps budgets were so tight that a cost of living increase wasn't possible, so they would put that in as a perk, as an incentive to say, look, we can't give you any more money, but here's a way to at least provide some kind of a stipend or revenue boost in some way to your check, your paycheck. So what's characteristic of union negotiations is it's always, once it's in, it's very difficult to remove. I mean, it's just, that's the way it works. So you've got to give something to get something. It's what we did with the police, the union budget, with carrying the tasers. So it's very, very difficult to go backwards in union negotiations.
Right. And it's unfortunate
yeah.
because if you look at
It is.
the overall budget, many of the benefits and stipends, when you calculate all of them in, you're talking about close to $3 million a year that we spend
Yeah.
on benefits and stipends, and I'm sure the city has many other good use for that money. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No argument from me, sir.
Counselor Bean.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, in your opening statement, you talked about the overlay account, surplus overlay.
Yeah.
Could you explain that, maybe for the general public to understand that, and how that's used, and what it's supposed to
Well,
be used
you know
for?
what, the assessor, that's his
Sure.
world.
Okay.
Why don't you,
Okay, so the, the Board of Assessors determines an amount of money that's put aside for abatements and exemptions annually.
like what?
We've traditionally used 2%, about 2%. What we hold off is about normal for every city and town in the state. I think it's 9.
What are some of the abatements, though? Give me an example.
Yeah, so elderly exemption, veterans exemptions, blind exemptions. So those are what we would call the statutory exemptions. People apply for them and get them. And that comes to about $250,000 a year. And then there's a reserve, the rest of the reserve is for overvaluation abatements. And that averages about, let's just say, $50,000 a year. So we're holding aside that money in case we have big cases. For instance, there's a Verizon case that's been valued by the state, and they recently settled a 10-year abatement. So this money is put aside and held to do two things: offset the statutory and the overvaluation abatements, and also to leave some money there for non-collectible personal property and real estate before it's sent into tax title. So that money sits in an account on the side, and until this year, until the Municipal Modernization Act was passed, that money had to be carried by year, accounted for year by year. The Modernization Act aggregated that amount, and so now it makes it a little easier. But essentially, once a year, the mayor asks what we have available in that account as excess, and then I calculate how much I need to reserve for unpaid personal property or real estate, and any amount reserved in the event that there could be more overvaluation abatements. So in the older years, it was mostly just Verizon. In the current years, it's any pending cases we have before the ATB. Then I let the mayor know that there's, X amount available to be released. And then we do that as part of the budget process, and then that money in the past has been used to balance the budget.
Is that a good process to use? Is it a good accounting practice?
It's the accounting practice that we've had to use to balance the budget. So if you ask me as an assessor, there's two different things. I don't put aside the overlay so that we'll have that money to spend to balance the budget, okay? So to me, there's a door between those two things. The Board of Assessors, and only the Board of Assessors, can determine how much we need to reserve for that account. When we ultimately release it, and what we do with it when we release it, is a function of the whole finance team. So to me, it's not simply a matter of saying we're overstating the overlay so that we'll have money to balance the budget. That's not the intention whatsoever. In fact, I've been very firm on the fact that the assessors are the Board of Assessors determines how much we need. That's separate and apart from what we end up doing with it if we have excess. So, there is some debate over whether it's a good practice. The fact is, it's been the practice that we've used, and getting away from it would require $700,000 in cuts.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying. I mean, it used to be a practice, and we don't do it anymore, but there was a practice 20 years ago that would take free cash and use it to balance the budget. I mean, again, and it took a while to get away from that.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, we have to get away from this. I'm just wondering, when is that? I know the mayor said in the future, but maybe it's now we start instead of in the future.
My feeling would be that we would work that down, our reliance on that down over time. I think that's prudent.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Gina Talley.
The overlay surplus account is a free cash account, and therefore it shouldn't be used to balance anything. Can that 700,000 go to repave roads?
Yeah.
Can it go to any lawful municipal purpose?
Once it's released out of the overlay, it can be used for any municipal purpose,
Is it the state
Subject to
DOR's,
appropriations.
subject to
is
appropriation.
it the state DOR's definition that that's a free cash account? Once it's released?
I don't know the actual state
It's not,
definition.
if it can be used for any lawful municipal purpose, once released, then it's a free cash account, correct?
It can be used for any municipal
Through
purpose.
appropriation.
It's subject to appropriation.
No different
and
than
it's-
free cash.
In the past, it was put to what they call the reserve for extraordinary and unforeseen expenditures. And I think different communities handle it different ways. Fitchburg has had its way. Other communities do it a little differently.
Fitchburg's way is wrong, and the budget hasn't been in balance for at least a decade, because that money can be used for anything. And so God help us if we do get huge abatements in the future, and that money's not there. What are we going to do then? You see,
Well, actually, Council, that's not how it works. The money that I reserve for this year is held, and I hold that money and don't release it if there's any abatements for this year.
should
so
we
that-
be relying on that account to fund a recurring budget?
Well, that's a better question.
Okay, well, that's getting somewhere. The point, ladies and gentlemen, is to educate the public. We shouldn't be using it. We've been using it for God knows how long, and we all know how well this city's been managed for 40 years. So that should tell you right there that we shouldn't be using it. So this budget's out of balance by 700,000, number one. Number two, I would like to direct everybody's attention to page 41, employee benefits. And I have been saying for a decade now that you can take this entire package and burn it, except for that page. This page dictates everything. And why do I say that? Earlier, there was some questions asked about revenue, and I agree. Forget the spending. Revenue is the key. How do we anticipate in 5 years covering these massive increases when this year alone, the increases in pension and health care costs entirely consumed our new property taxation and growth? Is there any concern about this? Because I don't hear anything. I talk to the mayor now, I talk to the previous mayor, and I get the same answer. What do you want me to do about it? Well, I'm not saying we need to do something about it in total. We owe $138 million in unfunded liabilities in pensions, per the latest actuarial report. And Mr. Brooks was kind enough to give me the payment schedule on pensions for the next 15 years, when we're supposed to be fully funded by 2032. You see, there are some in this room who roll their eyes. They think I'm a doomsday prophet. All I do is I read math, and I'm trying to educate the public on what they're going to get hosed for in 15 years. Okay? The previous administration didn't say boo about it, and I haven't heard this one say boo about it either. This is going to dictate everything. 2032, our payment will be $27.1 million, 2.5 times what it is today. Now, that is an annual increase of $1.3 million, and that doesn't even include health insurance. So my question to you, Mr. Brooks, is what would be a fair assumption on health care cost rate increases every year? Would 6% be a fair assessment?
Healthcare?
Yes.
This year, we have an 8% increase.
Yep.
And that's with having negotiated with the PEC to get some breaks on some of the benefits that we're providing.
What would it have been without the negotiation?
12%. Wow.
So if I use 6% as an assumption, is that a little liberal on my part, or should I be using a higher percentage?
I would say that could be low, the way health care costs are going. And, I have had conversations about where it's going and what's going on with whether it's Obamacare or Trump care or whatever is coming else down the road.
So using the payment schedule that was provided to us by Stone Consulting for the pensions,
Pension, yep.
and assuming from this point forward, health insurance costs are $14.6 million this year, if you say 8% increases for the next 15 years, on average, 8%, okay? Because that was what I was just told would be maybe a fair assumption on rate increases. From fiscal year 19, and I'm comparing the growth in pension and health insurance to the growth in property taxation and new growth. The average property taxation and new growth increase in revenues is 1.8 million a year. Next fiscal year, our unfunded debt is going to go up by 2.6 million. The next year, 2.1 million. If you go down the list and you use the property tax increases and the growth, we're going to be in a deficit for the next 15 years annually. Meaning, all of this increase is going to consume our new taxation and growth, so we're going to have to rely on local receipts and the state to keep bailing us out. Because right now, as of today, when the mayor submits his budget for a 2.5% increase and we put new growth in there, kiss it goodbye, it's gone. It's gone before it even hits the page. And some, which scares the heck out of me. Because now we're going to be relying on the other 10% of the revenues. Councilor Joseph asked, 43% of our revenues are property taxes and new growth. 47% is state aid. 10% is miscellaneous stuff that you were referring to earlier. We're going to have to rely on that 10%. And everyone does this. I don't want to talk about it because, well, what's done is done. So I've had some residents ask me, why does this happen? And my answer to them is simple. When I hear anybody in this room talk about paving roads, capital improvement projects, new services, added services, it's not going to happen. Because every dime, when the resident gets their tax bill next fiscal year, and they do a comparison between that bill and this bill they already got, whatever the differential is in the increase, they can take it to the bank that 100% of that is going to these accounts. It's not going to police, it's not going to fire, it's not going to roads. It's spoken for the next 20 years. Okay? That's scary. So what scares me about this, as it has for 10 years, and yes, I'm not saying it's this mayor's fault or the previous mayor's fault, I got it. I am deeply concerned about how these two accounts are going to destroy this city's finances. When 44% of your revenue stream is gone because of these two accounts. So Councilor Joseph mentioned the landfill. The mayor mentioned in 5 years the landfill will be at full capacity. Has anyone thought about what's going to happen if we lose that $2 million in revenue? You see, my job in the private sector is to look beyond next year. Municipalities only like to think of 1 year ahead. Having them do 5 years ahead is like, a brain freeze. Okay? I'd like to do 10 to 15 years out, especially when we get projections like this. I guess I'm the boy who cried wolf, but I don't know how mathematically this is going to work unless there's some magic pot at the end of the rainbow with gold in it. Okay? So I am deeply concerned. I said it every year for 10 years. You can take this entire document and burn it except for one page. And, I remember my colleague to my left talking about, well, let's lower the tax levy. Let's cut the tax levy by 50,000 or 100,000. Why? Make no mistake, I'm not saying that we shouldn't lower people's taxes, but if we do that, we have to sustain that cut forever, or else the residents are going to get nailed even more the next year. So I just want the people at home to understand that for the next 15 to 20 years, whenever you see an increase in your excise tax, your property tax, or fees, it's not going to services. It's going to current unfunded debt we owe on the books. That's it. I used to quibble and nickel and dime these budgets. 100,000, 5,000 here, 10,000 here. What does it matter anymore? These two accounts are killing us. Now, I know everybody else is in the same boat. Well, not everybody, because there are a lot of cities and towns who properly funded their accounts 50, 60 years ago. This is entirely the city of Fitchburg's fault. And now, like everything else at the state and the federal level, future generations are going to get screwed over this. Okay? Because basically, it's like working right out of college. You don't put away for retirement when you start working. And then when you get closer to retirement age, you have a come to Jesus when you go, oh, I got to put money away now. What do you have to do? You have to put a lot of money away now because of the 15, 20 years you let pass. That's exactly what this city has done. Okay? We have the fourth worst funded pension system in this state. Out of 104 systems, we are the fourth worst. So whenever I hear anybody talk about how wonderful things are in this city today, please. Fourth worst. And that's why I didn't submit a lot of cuts this year. Because I looked at that one page and I said, oh my God, $2 million. $2 million. What are we going to do? We're going to need to find some new revenue somewhere. And God help us if the state of Massachusetts level funds us or cuts us. Then we're really in trouble. Because we have to pay this bill. So this isn't new. Everybody in this room's heard me say it for 10 years now, which is probably why they're getting tired of it, but I have not seen any concrete analysis of scenarios. If this happens, because everybody's sitting around going, it's 15 years later. We'll worry about it when we get there. $27 million. If it's 8% increase over the next 15 years on average health insurance is going to be $33.7 million. Those two counts alone are going to be $58 million, and it's going to consume 92% of our 44% revenues from local receipts. So I'm preaching to the choir, I think, but I would like to see a little bit more concern about this, because I haven't seen it in 10 years. Because that's the argument I get. What's done is done, and it is what it is. We're going to have to do what we can. Or hope the state of Massachusetts throws us a Hail Mary pass and extends the date. So I don't like this budget entirety. There are good things about it. There are not good things about it. But I personally am not putting my stamp of approval on the sins of the past by continuing them. Okay? I know we're adding a building inspector. I know we've added some other people. Wonderful. I never voted for those budgets either. You know why? Because we shouldn't be hiring anybody when we owe $138 million. Thank you.
Counselor Beazall.
Thank you. Councilor Natale took some of my thunder. It is concerning that when you look at benefits, it's 1.9 million, and adding the 2.5% plus the growth is 1.8 million. So we're just not making any leadway with that. And what's worse is, I mean, presently speaking, I think we're going to probably see housing go up 3%, which will raise the cap levy up. But we can't depend on that cap levy to keep going up. At some point, we've got to take a look at the long term and say, what happens if all of a sudden the housing market dips down and the cap comes down? We may be in a position where we can't tax anymore. And the benefits part is still going to continue to be a debt that we owe. So how do you, at some point, justify that? Or how do we come up with something to say, we need to look long-term down the road and say, if this happens, and I don't want to sound like I'm a doomsday prepper or anything. I'm just saying I think that whenever we see this, like, people will come up to me and say in the fall, geez, you raised my taxes. Well, your taxes were going up when we held the budget hearings. They were already determined that your taxes were going to go up. We're just deciding in fall how it gets split. Are we going to burden the businesses, or are we going to have the residents pay a fair share of what they owe? That's really what it comes down to. But it worries me to the fact that I look at the numbers, and right now we're outpacing, benefits is outpacing what we're raising. And at some point, hopefully we continue to see the real estate and commercial properties, that value continue to go up. But if we ever reach the point where that declines and we've hit that cap, benefits are not going to go away. That's going to be something that's going to be there all the time. That means we're going to have to cut somewhere else. And it is concerning to see that. I don't sit here tonight and have all the answers for this, but I think at some point, maybe doing a little investigation and saying, what if we did this or what if we did that? And I think Councilor Tran, when we talk about lowering the tax levy, it was to the point where we want to slow down the cap to see if, at some point if we could slow it down at least a little so that we weren't going to reach that in the future if the real estate properties did decline in percentage. I don't have the answers. I'm sure that, you've all talked about this before, but it is concerning when you look at the budget this evening. you know, I'm going to vote for the budget. I don't see any way around this right now, but I think looking forward, we need to address this concern. So, thank you.
Counselor Green.
Getting back to page 19 with the TASER stipend. I guess my question is in fact...
19.
I'm sorry, page 19. Are we equipping and are our police officers going to be using TASER as a deterrent for non-lethal force?
Yes. Chief is here, can
I was
speak to
gonna
it,
say-
but they've been trained. They have been trained and they have been equipped with the tasers. Is that correct, Chief?
That's correct. For the past year, tasers have been deployed for the past year. It's fair to say we probably deployed tasers this past year about 14 times. That could have resulted in some type of lethal force. So we've seen the benefits of them at least a half dozen times this year.
Okay, thank you. And I just need clarification, page 5, under reimbursement for fringes/grants. FY17 recap, $12,000. FY18 budget, $562.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm wondering, the $550,000 additional dollars, is that contract that's pending that you can speak to?
Sorry.
She's asking about the 520, the
Fire and ambulance?
the reimbursement for grants we talked about earlier.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, go
The
ahead.
question has to do with the
Fringe and
Reimbursement
grants.
for fringes and
Reimbursement for
grants.
fringe?
Right.
What we
Yes.
talked about earlier.
Okay. Yep. That went up $550,000. That's money the city will receive from the school department and school grants, because the school grants will pick up the cost of fringe benefits for certain school employees.
Right there, okay.
And so that'll reduce their indirect cost, which increases the direct cost within the budget. So in order to do the accounting, we have to show revenue coming in from those grants to cover those expenses.
Okay, so this,
And this is the first year it's in the budget.
will it continue to be in the budget like this?
I expect so.
Okay,
I understand that the school department is actually starting with it this year in 2017. And so just to muddy the waters a little bit, the city will receive about $500,000 from them to cover fringe benefits, health insurance for school employees. We don't have a mechanism for moving that money back to the school budget, because by reducing the indirect, we have to increase the direct spending they have.
okay.
So that'll go through the free cash next year. the only
Okay,
way I
so
can
we're
do it.
seeing it here as revenue, but eventually it's going to be an expense through the school.
In the 18 budget, so next June, the school will send us a check for $550,000 from grant funds for the health insurance, and we will have already given them the appropriation. That's how we got up to 54.2 million. Without this 550,000, we would have been at 46.5 million.
Okay,
Yeah, whatever it is, 52.4, 51.8,
so we collected here to spend it there.
correct.
Okay. Thank you.
That's the magic of accounting, Counselor.
Shell game.
Counselor Gianatali.
Clearly, I am very passionate about what I spoke of earlier because I'm scared. And I want it to be understood. I understand we have new people now in these positions, and Ken's very good with what he does. And we have a new administration, fairly new. My point with these comments tonight is I am hoping that there is some kind of a deep dive of options here, because the public really needs to understand what this budget really is demanding of them and future budgets going forward. And I cannot stress to them enough that this isn't the current administration's fault. This isn't even the previous administration's fault, or the one. This has been something that's happened now over 50 or 60 years. But because the window keeps closing, we have to keep paying more every year, because for 30 years ago, we wouldn't put hardly anything into our pension fund. So I am scared, because as of today, our new revenues, 44% of those revenues, the increases are consumed already. So the math is there, the light at the end of the tunnel is there. I would just like to get some clarity on different scenarios, and even I put a petition in a few weeks ago to assess the possibility of having the retirement board extend our deadline from 2032 outward. The state of Massachusetts requires us to be fully funded by 2040. I understand that that 8-year window is for some contingency in case of market rate fluctuations, deaths, all the things that go into these calculations. I get that. But right now, people have asked me what the solution is. There is no solution for what we owe. So my only thought is, how can we smooth out the payments a little bit more manageable in that time frame? And quite frankly, pray to God that the state's going to extend the deadline again. Because they have, twice now? They've had a couple of times.
Twice.
Because those are the only two options. An extension from the state and smoothing these payments out farther. And maybe holding the line once in a while on COLA increases. It's very frustrating and nerve-wracking, because when I focus on the big fish, and because it's so far out, no one really wants to give it the time of day. This administration, the previous administration, they started the OPEB trust fund. This administration's already put several hundreds of thousands of dollars into it, acknowledging that it has to be addressed. I get that. But between the landfill capacity, the state being unpredictable every year, and the fact that every penny we raise out of the residents' pockets in property taxes is going to these two things, they need to know this. They need to understand this. Because when they say to me, "Counselor, why aren't the roads being paved?" This is one of the answers I give them. Because the money we're taking from you, Peter or Jane, is to go for unfunded debt that was accrued 50 years ago. Okay? That's where it's going. So Councilor Bezal mentioned about lowering the tax levy, and we've had this discussion with Councilor Tran. I got news for people. I am the biggest anti-tax increase guy you'll ever meet, but the city doesn't have a choice. We have no other way to raise revenues to pay for this unfunded debt. The mayor has no choice but to raise taxes 2.5%. Just like the one before him and the one before him. They have no choice. Because that doesn't even cover these increases. So we have to. So whenever we talk about lessening the levy, I hate to say this because I'm not a tax increaser, but we have no choice but to raise it. Because we got to pay for this stuff. So the comment made earlier about overlay surplus, it's $700,000. I am not advocating that we get rid of all $700,000. I have been asking for 10 years to show some type of movement in the right direction in getting ourselves off of that. Give me something. Make it $675. Make it $650. And no offense, ladies and gentlemen, $118 million. We can't find somewhere in here 50 grand to lower that revenue line item. I'm sorry. I can't accept that. Okay? Give me something to show that we're making a best case effort here. I know there are mandated increases, but there's got to be somewhere. I know there's somewhere. I found a few places, but again, nothing's happened in 10 years. That's why I get more and more passionate and frustrated, because I'm repeating myself constantly every single year, and nothing changes. Even though some have acknowledged that it is an issue, it is a concern, may not be a concern, is a concern. Where is the movement? Let's show something. So one of the cuts that I proposed doesn't have to be in that account. I'm trying to make a statement with the cut that we need to reduce our dependency on overlay. We need to reduce it. Because I want the mayor to have that money so he can demolish more buildings, maybe pave 7 or 8 more roads, and not rely on it to pay for salaries, because that's where it's going. So But again, it piggybacks off of the other problem with revenues. We get rid of that, you either have to make cuts, or you have to lower your you lower your revenue projections, you have to make cuts. I don't know if we can afford to do that at this point because of the unfunded debt. But I'm looking for some good faith effort here to start getting ourselves off of that reliance. It's been 700 grand in perpetuity as long as I can remember. So I'm not looking for the whole thing or even 20%. I'm looking for a little bit. I don't want to see 700,000 this year. I want to see something less. Thank you.
Counselor Caddy.
Just want to make a comment on that. The other public employee benefits, basically, it's our health care. Healthcare costs are spiraling out of control. The state of Massachusetts is $15 billion in arrears on OPEB. Newton, Mass is $700 million. This is a lot bigger than Fitchburg. This is all over the state of Massachusetts, driven by the increased cost of healthcare. Councilor Di Natale, I agree with you 100%, but I don't know if this is something that the Fitchburg City Council can handle. This has got to be handled on a state level. They got to go back and reorganize this and figure out what all these communities are going to do in this state. Thank you.
Councilors, that's the end of the speaking list. Are there other councilors wishing to speak, to ask questions or express concerns at this time?
I got a question.
Councilor Boschman.
Couple, as the city solicitor said, I have a few questions I should ask.
The floor is yours, Councilor Boschman.
First of all, going back to Councilor Di Natale's statement, what I don't understand is when I pick up the local newspaper and I read about a certain city saying to their retirees, no, you can't have a pay raise, but then we're in a financial situation that we are in. We have no problem to get pay raises. Can I ask you why, Mayor? Is there a reason why we give the pay raises?
The retirement board level?
Yeah.
Retirement board does that.
And versus,
Council, that's the retirement board. Exclusive of me.
so you don't have an input on that?
No.
None whatsoever?
No.
So let me just say,
I
no, 4 or
could
5
make
years
a
in a
phone
row?
call and voice my concerns perhaps, but they act independently, strictly independently for obvious reasons. They shouldn't be in a position to be influenced one way or the other. It's supposed to be an independent body.
All right.
And if I may, Counselor, I do sit on the retirement board.
You do?
I do. City auditor is an ex officio member of the board. And the COLA that's given, and has historically been given, and it's figured into the funding schedule that we have from the actuaries, is 3% on the first $12,000 of pension. So the maximum cost of living adjustment per year is $360 or $30 a month. So when we talk about a 3% COLA, it sounds like a significant amount of money. But when you look at individually what each retiree would get from a COLA, it's $30 a month. And that's the max.
Okay. I think it's page 43, Mayor. That would be the airport. Line item, let me see, 43, I had to get me on there, but. According to, a year ago, I proposed a thing, and then you asked me to take it back, a cut. And according to the study that we had, to the study that I read, put on by the airport, it said it did not need all the help that they had. And then according to the previous administration, who brought in this thing about Munich's, they said that once we implement this program, it would help save, different people told me it would help make the work easier for everybody, and everybody would be underneath the same system. Are we planning on making any cuts down there? Because if we're going to need the Munich system, according to the study that they did back in 2014, they said you don't need all these people. I didn't make the rules up, that's what the study says. We hear Councilor Di Natale says we're unfunded, the benefits are killing us. do you see yourself making any cuts down there if I propose that in one of the moves?
Counselor, first of all, I don't believe it'd be appropriate for me to discuss what we're thinking about doing with people's jobs and their lives and so forth in open discussion. So, but I can assure you of this, the solicitor, along with my chief of staff, we make every airport meeting, unless there's a commitment I have that I can't be at, they're always there. We have been engaged with the airport to an extent that I don't think's been to that level for a number of years, and we're proud of that. Are there issues that exist at the airport? Certainly, just like they are in any operation. But right now, we're going to move forward at the airport. I mean, with the new terminal building, the extensions of the runways, the work that the solicitor has done with the navigation easements. So things are looking better down there. There's a lot more to do. There's a lot of work that has to be undertaken in that airport, and we will do that. But right now, I'm not prepared to discuss what kind of personnel moves we would make.
All right. Now, on the MS4, the MS4 program, that would be underneath the DPW, and I believe it's page 25. And you proposed a $400,000 increase to the DPW for the MS4 program.
Right.
As you probably already know, because I was told that I had to submit, and I'm proposing a cut on the MS4. I know it's mandated. I also believe that going by the free cash that we had last year coming into this year, that instead of putting it on this row on our budget this year of $400,000, be finding in the free cash until we come up with a game plan. I'm a firm believer, councilors, that the homeowner is getting hit because he is a homeowner. It's almost like being a good boy, and you're a good boy, you get punished, but if you're a bad person, you don't get punished. And we're getting hit after hit after hit. We gave the water department a right to give us a rate increase. We just took a $20 million bond out for 12 years. We just told a couple of months ago, about a year ago, we told the wastewater treatment they can start their study for a rate hike, and now we're going to come out with this. I'm a firm believer that everybody should pay because we all want clean water. I believe that it's not just the homeowners. I'm going to repeat my statement. I keep on saying it. I'm a retiree. I'm a homeowner. And I'm not going to have this job forever. And I plan on staying in my house as long as the guy upstairs lets me. And I don't need to be driven out by high taxes or excess water bills and everybody else. I think everybody should pay their fair share of what's going on. Everybody wants clean water. Everybody likes the right to go down to the Nashua River and put their feet in if they want. They can. But we all want clean water, and it should be distributed. I sit back here, and I waited a whole year for information from the lady. The lady that sat right there, and she said, don't be afraid to call me if you have any questions. So I did call because I wanted to learn more about this because I know I have a big mouth. So I wanted to know as much as I could, but she never responded to me. Then I find out when I doing the budget, Nick, I think it's Nick, said to me, the lady got upset because I called, and I only get called her one time, and she doesn't want to accept any phone calls unless she gets paid because that's her line of work. But I wanted to find out how you can charge at different places, like the university, for runoff on their property into the sewer catch basins and all that. Because I feel, why should I, Councilor Tran, Councilor Bean, anybody in this table, and especially the elderlies, where their incomes haven't gone up, they're fixed. They're fixed, they're fixed, and they're fixed. And they're getting hit and hit, and you never hear them complain. They just keep on paying, but they keep on getting hit, and hit. And I'm one of those elderly persons now, as much as I hate to say it, but I'm getting tired of paying for everybody else. So I'd like to know, on that $400,000, we don't increase it this year. I won't cut the $12,000 and the $4,000 and the $15,000. because I believe we ought to start the program, but I think if you can find the $340,000 in free cash, we ought to use free cash, which come up with a plan and say, everybody, if you get 80,000 cars, $10 each on excise taxes, so everybody pays, because everybody uses the roads. It's not just Paul Boschman and the guy that lives on 108 St. Andrew Street that pays. Everybody pays. That's all I'm asking, Mayor.
Well, you know, Counselor, I appreciate your comments. You have a different approach to this. We've discussed how we're going to pay for this, but the fact of the matter is that we need to establish this fund in some way. If we look at free cash, we're still 4 months out from a new allocation of free cash that happens in September. This project, this program begins July 1. So we know what happens when the EPA doesn't like how you responded or haven't responded. They place decrees on you.
I understand that. I understand
That
that.
could be costly, far greater than $400,000. So we need to consider that.
And I think,
Go ahead.
if I may, and I
Yeah.
think the other piece of it is, we had the discussion at the beginning about, within our group, about whether to delay it and
Right.
have free cash used rather than put it into the budget. And the understanding I have from talking with Lenny Laxo, the DPW director, is that this is going to be an ongoing cost. This is going to be $400,000 a year, or possibly more, depending on what's going on.
10 years.
And so, free cash is not the appropriate place for that kind of an expenditure. Free cash should be used more for one-time expenditures. So if this were a situation where this year we were paying $400,000, and then it would go down to $100,000 a year after that, yeah, I could see using free cash to get over that hump. But it isn't. It's going to be this much each year, and we somehow had to work it into the budget.
I understand what you're saying, but I don't want to end up like Council Di Natale says. All of a sudden, we said, oh, Boschman's gone, $400,000. We got another next year, another $400,000 to $500,000 in there, and yet these different places don't pay nothing.
Yep.
And I have a hard time swallowing that, where I have to pay for everything, but yet they benefit just as much as I do, if not more, because they're saving and I'm not saving. And it's not fair and it's not right. Now, the lady said, and I'll quote the lady, she was sitting right where Mr. Wilson sitting, says, we can do that. We can charge them. We can make everybody pay. But I waited for the information for a year because I thought, and I'll be honest with you, when she didn't send it, I just thought it was just another talk, and nothing happens. And I really thought it was going away. That's what I thought when I didn't receive anything. And then all of a sudden, get the budget, and they were in front of us about that $400,000. I even mentioned it the other night about the $400,000. But I don't want, like Council Di Natale says, we talk about it tonight, we're blowing off steam. And then next year comes around, we're blowing off steam again, we don't like it, but nothing happens. And the year after that, and all of a sudden, we're $2.5 million, and the homeowners are still paying, and the same people are getting away with zero. Zero. It's not right.
Counsel, I urge you in the future, let me know, that was a consulting group that we hired. So
Yeah.
if you run into that kind of difficulty, that's unacceptable. So, you should let me know. And
Well, that's what Nick told me from there. He
well,
said they don't want to talk to, unless they get paid,
Well.
because she does that for a living.
Okay. But let me know next time.
All right. I didn't know it either
Let
till
it-
he told me,
don't let it
because
go
I
a
was kind of
year.
hurt, because I went down there to get the phone number.
Yeah.
And he says, well, they don't want us to really call anymore, the counselors, so.
Okay,
And that's what she said.
I'll call.
Counselor Boschman, are you all set?
I'm all set, sir. Hearing enough of me.
Counselor Tran?
Thank you, Mr. President. One line item that we touched upon was the tax levy. This year, the tax levy is increasing by $1.95 million. A couple of years ago, when we had an extensive discussion on this topic, we realized that we were about 5 to 7 years away from hitting the ceiling. If we don't manage the tax levy now, we're going to wake up one day realizing that we can't increase anymore. And then we have to we have to drastically reduce or make cuts everywhere and laying off people. We need to manage the tax levy now. If we do it correctly, we'll buy some time, and that time will allow us to to manage our spending and work on our pension liability. But we can't continue to increase the tax levy like the way we've been doing. We're going to hit that collision. We're going to hit that ceiling sooner or later. Thank you.
Are there any questions, further comments from counselors? I'll just add, these have been recurring themes. My biggest concerns were reliance on CDBG funding, and this isn't specific to this budget. This has been an ongoing issue for decades. Reliance on overlay surplus, as was discussed, and our reliance on waste management or our landfill revenue. We've been pleased by the strides the mayor made this year in this year's budget on the CDBG reliance and starting to move us. And I realize that can't be done in 1 year. And I realize there's some frustration by councilors for both overlay surplus and CDBG. It's tough to ease that kind of reliance in a singular year. I think we're looking at, hopefully maybe a 10-year plan to ease reliance on all of these funds. But ultimately, I think we need to protect ourselves against cuts at the federal level, particularly on CDBG. We have vital city employees that are funded through the program, as well as vital programs for our city that we rely on year to year. And if we can't find a way to bring that under the umbrella of our annual recurring budget, we're going to be in trouble in future years because we're at the whims of the federal government. Waste management, I'd ask, this is something I believe I asked for a couple of years ago and was disappointed we never engaged in such, but I'd love for a long versus short-term analysis to be conducted. At some point, we're getting $2 million annually from other towns that are paying in to dump trash in our landfill, but what are the gains in the short term versus what is long term if in 10 years we're shipping our trash halfway across the state to someone else's landfill? It's easy to take the revenue right now, and obviously that helps us offset critical costs and other programs in our budget today. But again, if that's crippling us 10 years down the road, I think we need to know it now, and I think we need to be able to be prepared to make to make a decision about the direction we go in. It's good to hear that we're in a situation where we might be able to extend the life far beyond what we initially thought with Westminster, but I think we need to be prepared to make those options, those decisions. And ultimately, I think Councilor DiNatale certainly touched on this topic, as did many other councilors, but our unfunded liabilities outpacing our growth and levy increases each year. That's concerning, and I'd love for us to be able to hold a finance committee meeting or hearing in the near future to be able to talk about the current schedule for repayment, as well as what options might look like to either alter that payment or look at what else it would take for us to get to that point. We may also have to at some point talk about whether or not there's legislative action that can be taken at the state level to help us to give us yet another extension. I'm sure there's other, as Councilor Caddy mentioned, there's other cities and towns. We may be the fourth worst funded in the state, but certainly there's other cities and towns that are certainly in the same situation that we are, and that may make sense for us to not only be in communication if we're not already, but also look at where can we seek legislative reprieve and look to extend that timeline out further if necessary. So overall, Mayor, I think I'm pleased to see some areas where you've looked to ease our reliance, and pleased to see us moving in that direction, and appreciate that you haven't tried to add too much further to those long-term liabilities of pension and benefits. That said, I have no other councilors wishing to speak at this time. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and second to adjourn. Speaking to the motion, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Unanimous. We're adjourned. Thank you, councilors.
Thank you, man.